Tom Toohey was not alone. He was the most visible hero of the Windscale fire. The man who climbed onto the roof. The man who directed the water. The man who refused to abandon his post. But he was one of many. There were the operators who stayed at their stations, watching the thermocouples climb, trying every procedure they knew. There were the firefighters who dragged hoses to the charged face and aimed them into the glowing core. There were the technicians who worked frantically to repair failed equipment, knowing that every minute in that building added to their radiation dose. And there were the men who warned of this disaster years before it happened. Men who raised their hands in meetings and were dismissed. Men who insisted on safety measures and were mocked. These are their stories. Terence Price, the man who saw it coming. Windscale is under construction. A young physicist named Terence Price attends a technical meeting. The topic is the reactor core, the fuel channels, the cooling air. Price raises his hand. What happens if a uranium cartridge bursts? He asks. What happens if the uranium catches fire? The smoke will go straight up that chimney. There are no filters, no containment, nothing to stop the radiation from escaping. The room falls silent. Senior engineers exchange glances. One of them mutters that it is too difficult, too expensive, too late to change the design. The meeting moves on. Price's question is not recorded in the minutes, but word reaches Sir John Cockcroft, the director of atomic energy, a Nobel laureate. He is alarmed. He immediately orders filters to be installed on both chimneys, even though the concrete is already set. Workers must build the massive filter assemblies on the ground, then winch them up to the top of the chimneys with ropes and pulleys. Dangerous work, expensive work. In the eyes of many engineers, completely unnecessary. They call them Cockcroft's Follies. 8 years later, those follies reduce the radioactive release from the Windscale fire by an estimated 90 to 95%. Terence Price never receives public recognition for his foresight. He continues his career in nuclear physics, works on the British fusion program. Become our professor. He dies in 2014. He never stops believing that the filters should have been installed from the beginning. Sir John Cockcroft, the man who was mocked. John Cockcroft was one of the giants of 20th century physics. In 1932, he and his collaborator, Ernest Walton, built the world's first particle accelerator. They used it to split the atom, the first time this had been achieved by artificial means. They won the Nobel Prize in 1951. When Cockcroft ordered the Windscale filters installed, he was at the height of his prestige. He did not need to justify his decision. He did not need to explain himself to engineers who thought they knew better. He gave the order and expected it to be carried out. The engineers resented it. They saw the filters as an unnecessary expense, a concession to academic timidity, a waste of time and money. They called them Cockcroft's Follies behind his back. They complained that the filters reduced airflow and made the reactor harder to operate. Cockcroft ignored them. He knew what they did not. The worst-case scenario, however unlikely, was too terrible to risk. He had spent his career studying the fundamental nature of matter. He understood, better than any engineer, the destructive power of the forces they were trying to harness. He was right, they were wrong. Cockcroft died in 1967, 10 years after the fire. He never learned that his follies had saved his country from catastrophe. He never received the public vindication he deserved. But the filters are still there, and every engineer who once mocked them now knows the truth. The operators, the men who fought blind. The control room of Windscale, Pile 1, the 10th of October 1957. The operators sit at their consoles, watching the thermocouple readings climb. They have no training for this, no manual, no emergency plan. They are improvising in real time, making decisions based on instinct and experience, knowing that any mistake could make the fire worse. They try CO, nothing. They try pushing the cartridge, it jams. They try adjusting the airflow, the temperature keeps rising. And then they try water, a decision that contradicts every safety rule they have ever been taught. Water on a graphite fire is supposed to be catastrophic. Explosions. hydrogen fires, steam bursts. The unthinkable, but the unthinkable is already happening. So they think it. The first jet of water disappears into the glowing channel. The temperature gauge flickers, then it drops. It works. They do not celebrate. They do not congratulate themselves. They continue working, hour after hour, monitoring the temperatures, adjusting the flow, until finally, in the early hours of the 11th of October, the fire is retreating. None of them receive medals. None of them are publicly praised. They return to their shifts, day after day, and never speak of that night. Some of them are still alive. Some of them still refuse to talk. The firefighters, the men who stood on the edge. The Cumbria Fire Service arrives at Windscale shortly after the alarm is raised. They have no idea what they are walking into. They have been told there is a fire at the nuclear facility. They have not been told the fire is inside the reactor core. They have not been told the smoke pouring from the chimney is radioactive. They have not been told the water they are about to use could cause a catastrophic explosion. They simply do their jobs. They drag hoses to the charge face, connect them to hydrants, aim jets of water into the open inspection ports. They work in shifts, rotating in and out of the reactor building to avoid heat exhaustion. They do not ask questions. They do not hesitate. Some of them receive significant radiation doses that night. Some develop cancers in later years. None are ever formally compensated. They do not ask for compensation. They do not ask for recognition. They simply do their jobs. The men who cleaned up, the forgotten workers. After the fire is extinguished, the hard work begins. They work in respirators and protective clothing, often in high radiation areas, often for longer shifts than safety guidelines recommend. They are the men who walk into the radioactive aftermath and make it safe again. Most of them are dead now. Some died of cancer. Some died of old age. Some simply disappeared into the anonymity of post-war Britain, their service unrecorded, their sacrifice unacknowledged. The whistleblowers, the men who spoke the truth. Not everyone accepted the official narrative. In the years following the disaster, a small number of scientists and engineers privately expressed their concerns. They wrote letters to government officials. They spoke to journalists. They tried to draw attention to the design flaws, the ignored warnings, the rushed construction. They were ignored. They were silenced. Some were threatened with prosecution under the Official Secrets Act. One of them, a physicist named John Dunworth, was so disturbed by the Windscale inquiry that he resigned from the Atomic Energy Authority in protest. He spent the rest of his career as an academic, quietly teaching the next generation of nuclear engineers about the importance of safety culture. He never publicly criticized his former employers. He never wrote a memoir. He never gave a tell-all interview. He simply walked away. He died in 2011. Why do we tell these stories? Because heroes are not always obvious. They are not always the men who climb onto roofs with fire hoses, though those men deserve our gratitude. Sometimes they are the men who raise uncomfortable questions at technical meetings. Sometimes they are the men who insist on installing filters that everyone else thinks are unnecessary. Sometimes they are the men who quietly resign when they realize their warnings have been ignored. The heroes of Windscale are not famous. Their names are not inscribed on monuments. Their faces are not printed on postage stamps. But they saved Britain. They saved countless lives, both known and unknown, and they did it without any expectation of reward. That is what makes them heroes. That is what makes their story worth telling. In Part 5, the truth emerges. 50 years of silence. A government that lied to its own people. A cover-up that stretched from Whitehall to the Cumbrian coast. And the slow, painful reckoning that finally came. You will learn how the Windscale inquiry records were locked away for 3 decades. You will meet the journalists and historians who fought to bring the truth to light, and you will discover why, even today, the full story remains unknown to most of the world. This is the final chapter. The debt is about to be paid. Subscribe to Mystery Doom and hit the bell icon. Thanks for watching Mystery Doom.